Good morning, everyone, and bon journée. Today, I stand with my colleagues, members of Parliament, Lindsay Mathyssen and Jenica Atwin, members of representing the Conservative, NDP, and Green Party on a very important issue. With the support of my caucus Conservative members, Jake Sahota, Raquel Dancho, and the Honourable Alice Wong, we have joined Canada's opposition parties to call on this government for immediate action. We have delivered a letter to the Prime Minister, to the Minister of Public Safety, the Minister of Justice, and the Minister for Women and Gender Equality. Programs supporting the fight against sexual exploitation and human trafficking and services to these victims have stopped. Programs where young girls can turn to the London Abused Women's Centre are being forced to end their programs. These programs are vital. These programs save lives. These programs give people a second chance. And these programs are working to end human trafficking and sexual exploitation. The government have announced $75 million, but this money is not being delivered to the frontline agencies at a time that they need it most. MAPI, otherwise known as the Measures to Address Prostitution Initiative, has expired and has not been renewed. We know that there has been an increase of sexual exploitation and human trafficking, and this problem has been made even worse through COVID-19. This issue has brought together Andréanne Larouche from the Bloc Québécois, Lindsay Mathyssen from the NDP, Jenica Atwin from the Green Party, and myself together. We need to end sexual exploitation and human trafficking. So my question to this government is, where is the money? I now welcome Lindsay Mathyssen, NDP member representing London Fanshawe. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karen. And yes, I am Lindsay Mathyssen, Member of Parliament for London Fanshawe and the NDP's critic for women and gender equality. The London Abused Women's Centre, or LOC, as we call it, is a vital part of the support network that exists in London and is one that helps support and protect women who are victims of human trafficking. As MP Vecchio noted, the MAPI funding ended for many organizations across Canada, but the promised funds from the National Strategy Against Human Trafficking has not been allocated. I was notified of this funding issue over a month ago by LOC's director, Megan Walker, and I instantly flagged it with the Minister for Women and Gender Equality. I am incredibly disappointed with the lack of response from the Minister's office. I've been in contact with LOC and have been pushing for answers both inside and outside of the House of Commons. This government needs to ensure funding this vital service. But this is what happens when women's organizations right across the country depend on project-based funding. Organizations are left to scramble and scrape together the funding to deliver programs that they know are essential. The federal government needs to get back to providing core, stable, reliable funding to women's organizations so they can deliver these needed services, especially when there's an emergency or something unexpected that comes up that they need to deal with. They can move funding to best fit what is needed by their community. Women who are trafficked and sexually exploited face so much. And now when they need that stability, when they need that support from their government, it cannot be taken away. These are not the actions of a feminist government. And just 2 days ago, the government announced the delay in finally delivering the National Action Plan for Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women and Girls. One of the calls for justice from the inquiry is to address the large number of Indigenous women who are trafficked both within Canada and across its borders. Women and Indigenous women are tired of cuts. They're tired of the excuses and they're tired of delays. We need action now. And just to wrap up, a few months ago, I had the pleasure of attending a local community meeting of people working to support women involved in human trafficking. And I spoke to a few of the folks that are working on those front lines, supporting Indigenous women who are trafficked. And I asked, how does this happen? How does this first start? And they said, you know, while every story is unique, often women in these situations, they know their abuser. They know the person, and they're the first person to tell them that they're special, or to tell them that they are loved, or to tell them that they're beautiful and supported. And that's how they can be pulled in. So we need to make sure that programs are in place to support women and girls in their escape and their recovery, and ensure that they know that they have options and that they are supported. Often women don't feel that they have those supports and that they don't know that they can make different choices. They believe that they have nowhere to turn. That's why these programs are so important. It makes sure that they have somewhere to turn, and it makes sure that they have somewhere to go. So I'd like to now welcome my colleague Jenica Atwin, the MP for Fredericton and the Green Party. Thank you.
Thank you much, and thank you very much. And I want to thank my colleagues for this very important initiative. And I think it speaks volumes that this is kind of across party lines. So it's incredibly important to us, and I'm very proud to be here to speak about it today. I would like to acknowledge that we are on the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. Acknowledging unceded land is just the first step in reminding ourselves that we have an obligation to the people who were here first, to Canada's Inuit, Métis, and First Nation peoples. One of those obligations is to confront the history of racism that has made Indigenous women and girls particularly vulnerable to abuse, exploitation, and trafficking. The ongoing impact of residential schools, combined with the racism inherent in our legal and justice systems, has meant that too many Indigenous women have been trafficked and sexually exploited. Too many of those are now missing and murdered. 95% of the victims of human trafficking are women and girls. A full 26% are under 18. So let's talk for a minute about Canada's obligations. For those under 18, Article 35 of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, it states that the parties shall take all appropriate measures to prevent the abduction, the sale of, or traffic in children for any purpose or in any form. Nous sommes également signataires de la Convention sur l'élimination de toutes les formes de discrimination à l'égard des femmes, de l'article 6 stipule que l'État partie prenant toutes les mesures appropriées pour supprimer, sous toutes leurs formes, le trafic des femmes et l'exploitation de la prostitution des femmes. And to come back to our obligations towards Indigenous communities, under the United Nations Declarations on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, Article 22 states that parties shall take measures in conjunction with Indigenous peoples to ensure that Indigenous women and children enjoy the full protection and guarantees against all forms of violence and discrimination. Given all of that, I cannot fathom how this government justifies letting this funding lapse for organizations dedicated to supporting and protecting women who are victims and survivors of human sex trafficking. This is why I am pleased to stand with my colleagues across party lines to encourage this government to reverse their decision. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and we're willing to take questions now. Thank you.
We'll now go to questions. We'll start with questions on the phone. We'd like to remind reporters to keep it one question, one follow-up. Operator, do we have a first question?
Thank you. Please press star 1 at this time if you have a question. Veuillez appuyer sur étoile 1 maintenant pour poser une question. Our first question, notre première question est de Catherine Lévesque, la presse canadienne. À vous la parole, please go ahead.
Oui, bonjour. Hi, everyone. Well, just a first quick question. I thought the Bloc Québécois was also supposed to be at your press conference. Do we know what happened with that?
Thanks very much for asking. And we have worked very, very closely with Andréanne Larouche, who is the NDP critic for women and gender equality. Bloc. Did I call? Oh, I'm so sorry. I apologize. We have worked very, very closely with Andréanne Larouche from the Bloc. Unfortunately, we do not know her whereabouts today. We have been trying to connect with her, but she is very, very supportive of these measures, as well as members of the party. Thank you.
Okay, great. I just wanted to get
I appreciate that.
Okay, so I guess my question would be, we know that this COVID crisis has affected women in particular, in all aspects of the crisis. I was wondering if you all agree as well that the response for the crisis should also be adapted to this reality.
Well, I'll start off with that question, if you don't mind, and we'll all be taking turns recognizing social distancing. We know that when the programs were put forward, gender-based analysis was not completed on some of these programs, including the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit. I question whether any of the COVID-19 responses has taken on that unique lens to see how has this impacted women differently. We know that looking at the sectors, including hospitality and the travel sector, many part-time employees, these are all women. So those are things that we have to look at, and how, as we're moving forward and hopefully outside or out of the COVID-19, how are we going to address these issues? I am urging the government to make sure that they use the gender-based analysis lens on this as they're moving forward with any of the programs, and recognizing that there are challenges not just by your gender, but also regional differences and the demographics. Thank you.
Absolutely, and I just want to reiterate to what Karen said. it is really key that we recognize the huge impact that COVID-19 has had specifically on women who are marginalized in every way, women with disabilities, living with disabilities, women who are Indigenous, all of these things, they come into play, and the government has absolutely a responsibility to deal with this. But it's also one of the reasons why I want to emphasize so much that we need to return to longer term funding, to a longer strategy, this core funding that organizations used to be able to rely upon, so that it's not project based. So we've seen the end of one project, but there is no continuation. And so these organizations are left to scramble trying to put something together, especially in these times. They don't have the ability to respond to unprecedented emergencies and things like a global pandemic. And so that's why I think that's really key in terms of that core long-term stable funding.
And if I could just add, it's also important to have a race-based lens when we want to collect data on what's happening with COVID-19. We stand here in a position of privilege, and I think it's really important that we acknowledge that. But we're using that position of privilege now to voice, our concerns over this, and we hope that it's being heard. And it certainly is about that core funding. Organizations are direct service providers. They play such a critical role in our communities, and just again, it's disheartening to hear that such a critical service is being cut. So you're absolutely right. We need to consider how this affects women in particular, but certainly women of color and in a minority status situation in our country. Thank you very much.
Opératrice, prochaine question.
Thank you. Merci. Once again, please press star 1 at this time if you have a question. Veuillez appuyer sur l'étoile 1 maintenant si vous avez une question. We have no further questions registered at this time. Back to you. Oh, we do have a question from Catherine Lévesque.
Perfect.
From La Presse Canadienne. Please go ahead.
Perfect.
Hi, me again. I just wanted to ask my second real question because the federal government has announced that it's going to delay the National Action Plan on missing and murdered Indigenous women. So I was just wondering what your reaction was to this delay, and should this action plan, really focus on human trafficking? Well, I guess my question is, what would you like to see, given that this action plan will be delayed?
Well, I think as Lindsay had indicated, it goes hand in hand. When we're talking about our murdered and missing Indigenous women, we're talking about human trafficking. We know that there are parallels there. So I am very concerned as this moves forward that there has been a delay. There's been a delay on lots of things when it comes to what's happening with the government, including parole board hearings on places, people like Marilyn Levesque. There's been many delays that we have seen, and I'm very cautious as we're moving forward because I fear what could happen to some of our most vulnerable women and girls. And the longer there is a delay, the more horrible things that can happen. Thank you.
So for me, it's completely unacceptable to delay the action plan on implementation of the recommendations for the missing and murdered Indigenous women. We've seen how creative we can be in Parliament. We've started our hybrid version of the COVID committee yesterday. We can meet by Zoom. We can call each other. There's no excuse to delay this plan. Those who are involved in what was supposed to be the action plan should still undertake that very important project. And so they owe it to not just Indigenous women and girls across Canada, but all Canadians. It shows that we have a commitment to this as a very serious issue in our society, and there doesn't need to be a delay because we can't meet in person. So it's unacceptable to me. Thank you.
Catherine, une autre question peut-être? Ou t'es correct?
Oui, je vais en profiter.
Oui, une dernière.
Oui, absolument. So just a last little question. I guess it's interesting because all the opposition parties today are brought together on this same issue. I was just wondering if maybe the leaders from your parties could learn from this collaboration, moving forward with the virtual parliament, hybrid parliament.
Thank you for that. I think that I'm certainly very proud of the work that the New Democrats have done, working together with the government, working together with other opposition parties as needed to ensure that Parliament continues to function, and that we get the equal representation across the country, to really move forward on some of the really key supports that we are so proud that we can be a part of to provide for Canadians, the expansion of the CERB supports, the increase of the wage subsidy, certainly our last ability to, that just happened this week, to get the government to provide far more supports for persons with disabilities, and of course the 10 days of sick leave. That was us working together, our leaders coming together to work with the government and others to provide those real solutions for Canadians. And I do believe that it is important, and it is absolutely true that, and I'm so grateful that I have these wonderful women to work with, both close by and across the country, to really bring forward some of the key things and the key issues that are hitting women during this crisis. In terms of the murdered and missing Indigenous women, I didn't have a chance to address that, but absolutely this is something that cannot, the report was promised to be enacted after the year. The 231 calls for justice have to be implemented. We have to have movement on that, absolutely. Too many of these women continue to suffer such injustice, and the families suffer horrible pain and sadness, and the government has a responsibility, it has acknowledged that, but it has a responsibility to come up with real action on this. And there is no excuse. They have the tools. They have to be maybe a bit more creative, but we've shown that we can do that, and we need to move forward.
Thank you, and thank you for that question. And, you know, even throughout the election, I was so excited by the prospect of a minority parliament. For this very reason, it just shows that a diversity of voices coming together with shared values can really send a powerful message to Canadians. So absolutely, I would encourage our leaders to continue this kind of, collaboration. And I think it's been happening. I think we've seen that throughout the COVID-19 crisis. We've been able to work together to make amendments to some of the initiatives put forward, and I'm very proud of that. So these are some of the things that make me the most excited. It's working with my colleagues, it's getting to know them better, and to really appreciate their passions as well. So I'm just once again so thankful for this opportunity, and absolutely we need more of this collaboration across party lines. Thank you.
And thank you very much once again to Jenica and Lindsay and Andréanne. This is something that I could not have done without their help, and they couldn't have done with all of us out working together. And it is about people working together. We're not just about asking questions, but we're also part of the solution. And that's why parliamentarians have a role to play when we're talking about legislation, when we're talking about programs. We represent people within our own ridings that have their own challenges, and that's why MPs need to have their voice. This is an opportunity where we can come together on an issue that we all agree on. We may have a different solution on exactly how to get there, but we know that there is a problem and we've identified the issue. Now let's fix it. And this is something that, working with the opposition parties, we are planning on doing. Thank you.
Opératrice, avons-nous une autre question? Do we have another question? Opératrice, do we have another question?
Yes, we do. It's from Sarah Bogdan from 980 FPL Global News Radio, London. Please go
Welcome,
ahead.
London.
Hi. So the London Abused Women Centre, and I think the other organizations, were given the impression when the one program ended that funding, they were told to apply to another program. And then obviously there's been a delay, but do we have any idea about why there was that time lapse? Because I think they were under the impression that that wouldn't be happening.
Absolutely, and thank you very much for that question. There is a Victims of Crime Fund that back in November, I know that London Abused Women's Centre, that was something that they were directed to and applied for. Unfortunately, the eligibility for those types of services that the London Abused Women's Centre work on, those aren't part of the eligibility criteria of those programs. So the human trafficking money that they were led to believe had been put into that crime fund was not there. Following this up further and further, we know that the minister is working with the provinces, but right now they are working with the provinces, meaning that there is a delay. So on March 31st, when this the MAPI program ended, the funding for human trafficking and sexual exploitation ended as well by the federal government. Some of the provinces are trying to pick them up. And I know in the City of London, with Megan Walker and the incredible support that she has, the community has to come together to help fund it for one more month. But what's going to happen after June 30th? And those are the things that we need to happen. When doors are closing and women and young girls need these services, there is nowhere to go. So I am urging the government to look at how they can either extend at MAPI or how they can get some of this $75 million out the door so that we can help these young women and girls who are suffering at the hands of their predators. Thank you.
To add what Karen had said, yes, so one of the issues too that comes into play here is that the Liberal government just before the last election announced $75 million to the national strategy against human trafficking. And so a lot of these organizations thought too that funding was available for them to continue on the amazing work that they do. And I know that when the London Abused Women's Centre contacted me, they had been trying to work through contacting as many ministers and departments as they could, trying to figure out how they would have an extension of this funding. And they were not responded to. They were given sort of that cold shoulder, and they weren't being given an explanation. So they reached out to members like myself and Karen in the area to see what we could do. And that's when we also tried to get answers out of all of those ministries, but unfortunately nothing came forward. And again, at the very last minute now, they were scrambling. They didn't have the ability to go beyond that specific project funding, and now they're left. And I'm so grateful that our community did come together to try and provide that extension, but it is up to the government, it is incumbent upon the government to ensure that they have those funds and that core funding to stabilize these amazing programs that exist.
A follow-up? Do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, obviously in London especially, our community has come together and they've extended it for a month. But is there anything the government can do, or is there any interim support available to help these programs that will eventually run out of money fairly quickly while they wait to hear about the new funding stream?
We haven't been told by any of the government ministries or departments what they have planned to do. Absolutely, they have a lot of tools at their disposal to ensure that the programs continue. My key concern, too, is that once a lot of those amazing people who deliver those programs are let go, if the funding isn't available soon, those people will have to move on. They'll have to find other jobs, and they'll have to abandon those projects, and to restart them up after so long will take time. It'll take a lot more money, and again, you're leaving really vulnerable women and girls without a place to go and without a place to turn to. So I think that the government has a lot of options to be able to put forward what is needed in the interim to ensure that those programs do not lapse, but it is up to them to actually respond and do the right thing.
And Karen Vecchio back. And specifically when we're looking at those programs, I know that the London Abused Women's Centre, as well as all of the other organizations, have not left a stone unturned. They have been looking for these programs. They have been reaching out, as Lindsay said, to the ministers, to the members of parliament in the London area. And that is part of the issue. There is not an envelope that will help these organizations through this very, very difficult time.
And we have time for one last question on the phone if we have any. Operator, do we have a question?
We do have a question from Émilie Bergeron de l'agence QMI. À vous la parole, please go ahead.
Hi, I would like to know, with hybrid parliament, with the motion that passed, it is now possible to address other topics than just the ones directly linked to the COVID-19 crisis. But the focus is still pretty much on the pandemic. So do you fear that some issues regarding women are tossed out and still not addressed?
Thank you very, very much, and I appreciate that question. I know Motion 7 came out the other day, and I had debated saying that we need to resume Parliament so that we can have these debates that are outside of just COVID-19. Because as COVID-19 is this, human trafficking continues to exist. They just doesn't stop because of the pandemic. If anything, it gets worse. I know that as the Shadow Minister for Women and Gender Equality, I am urging this government to have the Committee of Status of Women to meet. We know that there are so many issues that are happening with women right now, whether it's the economic issues, the violence issues, childcare, all of these different things that are landing on the shoulders of families and specifically women. I can speak for myself being a mother and also being a daughter. It has been a very, very trying time. I'm a very fortunate person and I have a very solid family, but at the same time, I know the challenges that I have faced. I can't even imagine if I was a woman of abuse, the challenge that extra layer to it. I cannot even imagine if I did not have a home to go to. All of these things, there needs to be some solutions, and we need to continue to debate these. We need to continue to discuss these, and I'm truly hoping that the Prime Minister and the government recognizes that at a time of COVID-19, that women's issues must be addressed, and I hope that they will reconvene the Status of Women Committee so that we can discuss these really important issues that are impacting women every day. Thank you.
This is Lindsay Mathyssen. One of the things that we were able to negotiate in terms of the hybrid parliament was, in fact, the ability, like you had said, to talk about things other than simply COVID. Obviously, it's on top of mind for everybody. It impacts every aspect of what Canadians are going through right now. But I know that I've certainly been bringing up in Parliament, and my colleagues have been doing a fantastic job in the virtual sittings of the COVID committee. We will continue to bring up all of these issues that impact women, that impact all of their constituents across this country as we can. We have a lot of other tools at our disposal to work, to communicate with the government, to try and get results. Press conferences like this are one of them, and certainly working together, continuing to put pressure on the government is a responsibility that we have, and I will not stop. I will not let this issue go. I know certainly that my other colleagues here will not let this go. We will continue to fight for what's best for our constituents.
Jenica Atwin here. Just to add to that, it's COVID-19 has highlighted the inequalities in our society, has highlighted some of these issues that have existed for such a long time and exacerbated them. So I would make the argument that most topics should be fair game, with the lens of COVID-19, because it's again, only highlighting how critical our response needs to be. So, we work hard as parliamentarians to voice these issues, to bring them forward. And I would add that actually the extended question time that we have in the virtual committee is very interesting, and it allows us to have a better exchange and to cover a broader range of topics. And so I think you'll find that members of Parliament are being very creative and kind of thoughtful in their approach to these questions to include a lot of topics that you might not consider, right at the top of mind when we think of a pandemic. So that's certainly what I've been doing. I know my colleagues have been doing the same thing. So we'll continue to press on a multitude of issues, and certainly, but with the lens of COVID-19. But we do need to push for more committees to be functioning. I think that's important as well. It's interesting, the ones that we have decided are kind of our priority, but I would love to see the Committee on the Status of Women to be reopened as well. Thank you.
Do you have a follow-up?
Yes, I just want to clarify. One of you mentioned that this issue was raised a month ago. So what happened a month ago for most of these associations that don't have funding? Was it that the projects they received funding for was they had their due date met and they couldn't renew any funding? In most of the cases, what is the kind of explanation that has been given?
Well, thank you very much. And the explanation that we have been given is that they're continuing to consult. They have extended their consultations, which were 2 years, and they've extended to 3 years to decide how they want to move forward with this. This has been something that we've been consulting on for years. But at the same time, we need to put action in. We can talk, but if there's nobody there to open those doors to help those young women and girls, it does not matter how much you talk. There needs to be action. So what happened with this program is once the program had ended on March 31st, this government has not renewed renewed the program and did not replace this program with anything else. So that is where the void is. And unfortunately, there is not a gap for us to fill at this time with government funds. Do you guys want to go? Go ahead.
So, I mean, I just wanted to add that this came onto my radar because of Ms. Vecchio's work, and that I, heard her ask the question and press the government during our virtual parliament sitting, and the response was inadequate. And so this is why we're continuing to push, because the gap still remains, and there isn't an answer for us right now. So it's important that we continue to voice, this and advocate for funding and for them to relook at this and to reprioritize, because it takes opposition voices, I think, to put these things forward for our government members. And so I would like to thank, in particular, Ms. Vecchio for her advocacy on this. Thank you.
This is Lindsay Mathyssen. So the London Women's Abuse Centre approached me, and I had said over a month ago, because they had for months before that been advocating and trying to connect with government ministries and departments, trying to have an answer in terms of the end of the MAPI funding and the continuation or response to the other forms of funding that they were looking for to continue on the programs that they were delivering. So when they contacted me, they said, "Is there any supports you can provide us? We haven't heard anything. We need to move this forward. We're running out of time." And so I tried to get responses out of the Department for Women and Gender Equality from the Minister's Office, and I did not hear back. And then both Karen Vecchio and myself, we raised it in the questions and answers to ministers, trying to get responses in that format too. And so now we've put forward to this letter as an additional push and this press conference to try and get some responses for these programs and for these organizations.
This concludes the press conference. Ceci met fin à la conférence de presse. Merci.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for setting this up. We do appreciate it.